Welcome to IR Insights Australia, brought to you by Dentons. IR Insights, hosted and featuring members of our National Employment and Safety team and guests, delivers practical guidance and expert analysis on employment law and workplace relations in Australia. This series is designed to help employers stay informed and compliant in a rapidly changing regulatory environment, as well as provide practical strategies to help you manage workforce challenges with confidence. We invite you to send any questions to our dedicated email, irinsights.au@dentons.com. Before we begin, we'd like to share an acknowledgement of country from Auntie Munya Andrews.
Nangamalari, I'm Auntie Manya, and on behalf of Dentons and everyone here today, I would like to recognise the stories, traditions, and living cultures of the land on which we meet. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and their continued connections to land, sea, and community. And we pay our respects to elders past and present. Nangamalari.
Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on PR disasters in the workplace, how they happen, why they escalate, and what organisations can do to prevent them. I'm Paul O'Halloran. I'm a partner at Dentons, and great to be joined by my guests today, Michael Zapponi and Dieter Lehmann. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Paul. Good to see you again.
Pleasure. So when I'm thinking of PR disasters, when I was talking to somebody about this earlier today, the one thing that comes to mind right at this moment is Prince Andrew. I don't think we act for Buckingham Palace, so I think we can probably refer to that as the sort of the quintessential PR campaign that became an absolute disaster. We hope that our clients are not dealing with issues of that magnitude, but I am often asked, do I know a good PR company? And I'm often very happy to volunteer Nominus. So could you guys let us know what Nominus is, what it means, and briefly what you do at Nominus, and then we'll jump into some of the questions around staying out of the media headlines and what companies can do if they find themselves in a situation where there's media interest in their operations.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'll kick off with a bit of background. So great to be chatting with you and your clients today. Dieter and I first worked together probably 25 years ago now. We have a background as journalists, so we both started our career studying journalism and working in the media. And I think that's really important because we understand what drives media, what drives news, what makes news. So after a career in the media, then we both worked in government, working as political advisors, and then went on to have our own careers in the corporate sector, working for publicly listed companies in Australia. The last company I worked for was Telstra, which is Australia's main telco, running the media team there, day-to-day media issues. That worked then for 8 years. We've now been running Nominus. So once Dieter and I decided to set up Nominus, we've worked with a lot of different clients through different sectors. I think the thing to note is that when you work in a corporate affairs environment, reporting to boards and reporting to CEOs, you do gain a lot of experience, and it's almost sector agnostic because the issues are the issues, media is media. So whether you're advising in the health sector, in the financial services sector, the advice remains the same. So we have experience across many sectors over the years. And what we do is try and protect and enhance reputations. A lot of our work is proactive work to try and help enhance reputations of organisations. But there are also times when we are called in to help protect reputations, and that's often when a crisis happens. So that's in brief what we do. I'll throw to Dieter to add a little more there.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and hi to everybody viewing or listening to the podcast. Really pleased to join you. It's a pretty good wrap up by Michael. I think the only addition, really minor addition I've got is that more often than not, you find that crises aren't usually done on purpose. Thankfully, more often than not, things you find yourself in situations that you just were totally unexpected, and many times actually out of your control. There are times when there are things within your gift that you've mucked up or not done as well as you'd liked, or there's certain behaviours that have gone on that just aren't tolerable. That can be a bit of a different story. But I still think over the journey, Michael and I have been doing this for over 30 years each. More often than not, it's the unexpected and out of your control that can land an organization and individuals within the organization in a bit of hot water. And that's where we come in to help sort of find a way through that and then come out the other side and help bring sort of business normality and human normality back to situations.
Yeah, great. I mean, it's such a fascinating topic, and I was just reading yesterday about this growing. I don't even know what you would call it, but this sort of discipline of social media companies that are actually involved in cancel culture, and whether it's, for Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni or Rebel Wilson, allegedly, these companies that are engaged to actually spread misinformation out there about particular individuals to damage their reputation, which is probably a whole different topic and different podcast. But I think the point is that today, with social media, the reach of damage for a corporate brand is just accelerating at levels that we've not seen before. And it comes up with the work that we do. Employment law, which is my expertise, is just there's a lot of topical information. Um, and so it's really interesting to see how these things can get out there and what you can do to contain them. So, first question for you guys: a crisis can appear in many forms. What actually constitutes a workplace crisis?
I can start off with that, Paul, if that's okay. I mentioned a little earlier, more often than not, it's completely unexpected. Organisations can anticipate risks. Now, often organisations' risk registers are very well documented, and there will be a top 5 or 10 risk list that you would have in your organisation, and you would go about mitigating those. But sometimes crises, again, more often than not, can be something outside that list and be totally unexpected. But generally, it has to either threaten the safety of individuals within the workforce and outside the workforce, including, big injuries or even worse, and people passing away. It could be a complete breakdown in your organisation's operations for one reason or another. And that can result in huge loss of revenue and profit, so top and bottom line impacts, and your reputation. Are you a good company with the right values and the right ethics, or is there something in there that's just not right in those spaces? But normally, procedures around a crisis aren't always well organised, but at these times, you really have to be coordinated right across your business to respond properly.
Yeah, anything to add to that, Michael?
Look, I think one of the key things is that, it's totally normally it's unexpected and you can get caught out. So as Dita mentioned, preparation is really important, and not sitting around waiting for it to play out is also something that is often a big mistake that companies make. So once you get the sense that things aren't right, it's really important to act quickly.
What I've also seen in experience is sometimes you think the issue that might give rise to the crisis, or perhaps the issue that a journalist is contacting you about, is the thing to be concerned about, where in fact there's something in body buried underground somewhere, to use that analogy, that actually is the biggest issue. And once people start fossicking around, things start to come to the surface. And I think companies can sometimes be caught unaware of these sorts of things from historically, or um, that are peripheral to the major issue, and sometimes that becomes the bigger media issue rather than the initial thing. So I think thinking broadly about all the sorts of controversial things that perhaps could come out is also a good tip for employers faced with this situation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just to add to that, a journalist is not going to ring unless they have really solid information about the issue they're calling you about. They're not going to ring on a whim. They will often have somebody within the organization that's leaking information to them, or a former employee of the organization who is handing them information about this specific issue. So when the journalist does call, you can be sure that they have thoroughly researched the issue at hand, and they won't be coming to you on a whim.
Good to know. And usually, or perhaps always, they won't disclose the source of the information. I know we're asked from time to time, who is it? Because we want to discipline the person or terminate them for speaking to the media. But is it your experience that the journalists won't ever disclose their sources?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a code that the journalists operate by. They will never reveal their sources, and you often find that that's the way they operate.
And sometimes, Paul, it's important to remember the topic rather than the people. So you can get lost pretty quickly on who's speaking or who's talking about what. But I think wise and experienced businesses would be best placed to ask, what's the nature of this complaint? What is there something we're missing here, or is it something that's known but is now about to become public? And rather focusing on, some sort of even witch hunters to who's speaking to whom about what, really think about and think about yourselves as leaders and the organisation as whole and its values. Does this have veracity to it? And if it does, we need to really get onto this and fix this and sort it out. We've worked together in the past, Paul, as you mentioned earlier, and as you do look like that and uncover more things, it's really important to try and find the gap between the known and the unknown as quickly as you can, and really be humble and genuinely curious about it, rather than seeking to write it off, or sort of argue about who might be speaking to media. That, in many cases, isn't really the priority at that point.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what has changed in the last 5 years in terms of what you're seeing escalate to front page news in terms of social media? Is it whistleblowers, leaked emails, viral content? I mentioned before, there's this cancel culture piece that some companies are specializing in to discredit senior executives, and maybe a little bit more so in the entertainment world. But what are the top issues you're seeing that's changed over the last few years?
Michael, do you want to have a go at that one? Start with.
Yeah, look, I think I'll hold up my phone, because this is what's changed a lot in the last decade or so, and that is everybody is a journalist. Everything is captured. So any type of behavior that is not befitting of the organization can be captured, whether it's on a night out, whether it's at a concert, and a CEO and the head of HR aren't doing the right thing, that will be captured. And media moves very quickly these days. So the viral content you mentioned, Paul, is the biggest change I've seen in the last 10 years, because things are live and things are immediate, and we don't have time to contemplate a response. Once a clip is viral and social media amplification happens, then you're in a crisis. And I suppose one of the key examples of that we've seen recently over the last 12 months was the Coldplay concert. And I mentioned the CEO of Astronomer Inc., Andy Byron, and his head of HR. That went viral on social media. And we all know what happened from there. They both lost their jobs. Within days, that clip triggered a wave of negative press. And then what then happened was interesting, because then employees within the organization started leaking to journalists, talking about the company's culture. And the damage to that brand just started to increase tenfold. So it wasn't just about this moment that was captured on the large screen. It then uncovered a poor culture within that organization. So the lesson really there was this was a governance failure. It was just captured on a big screen, and it highlighted some deeper issues within that organization. They tried to counteract it, and they tried something smart, what they thought was smart, with a proactive approach to try and turn the narrative around with using Gwyneth Paltrow to talk about the virtues of the organization. But ultimately, whilst it might have worked for 24 hours, this organization is still suffering today as a result of what happened here and the deeper issues which were ultimately exposed by what happened with the CEO at the concert.
So that was a visual, that was a very visual scenario, I suppose, that kicked off the interest in that. There was something irresistible about and for the people listening, where we can see I guess the screenshot from the concert where these two executives are shocked and horrified when they see their own image up on the big screen at the concert. Their immediate reaction to that was one of that caused people to have suspicion, like why were they so embarrassed by this? Caused people to start looking around. So Dieter, what do you think about in terms of what the ingredients of this particular scenario was that was so fascinating to people, like literally globally?
Yeah. And look, I'd also say, preface these remarks, Paul, by saying when we look at situations like this from a work perspective and a reputation perspective, one thing we try not to do is make judgments on, things like people's relationships and what's a right and wrong relationship, and we look at the impact to the organisation, as Michael explained, and there were 120 million views within a few days of this around the world. And it had the ingredients, because I think Chris Martin from Coldplay even suggested at the concert that they were either very shy or having an affair or whatever. And that we sort of look at this image and we sort of giggle. The first thing that comes is a giggle, but the reality was, for the organisation, they were without significant leadership within 2 or 3 days after that, and there was a lot of internal difficulty with it. So it's one of those ones where, even though issues pop up, we try not to litigate too much in this case about whether or not it's an appropriate relationship. We try and zero in on what does that mean for the organisation and its operations over the next few days, but also its culture ongoing. So it was a very fast-moving one. It had, as you say, all the ingredients of a bit of a soap drama, a bit of a soap opera, and also a little bit of comic relief in it. You sort of couldn't make it up. I mean, what are the chances of being on that camera with 100,000 fans somewhere in the US? I don't know, but you just don't know what's around the corner. That one well and truly falls into the unexpected column, I would have thought.
Yeah, and I guess, maybe 10 years ago, this sort of stuff was not captured as readily as it is today, as you say, with iPhones, which are everywhere. So I guess following on from that, what sorts of mistakes do organizations make immediately after an incident that has garnered some interest and which also guarantees negative media coverage?
Yeah, I think one of the key points here is that reputations really aren't destroyed by the crisis itself. Uh, they're killed by how organizations handle them.
Mm.
And that's a really important point. So silence and a delayed response can really help fuel the negativity around an organization. So what we look at is the ability to be agile and authentic. That's not optional. You have to be agile. You have to be authentic. So whether it's a rogue, meme or a cultural flashpoint, it's really important that you practice social listening. And often organizations have big social media teams. That's been a really big growth area in corporate affairs environments is how you listen to what's happening, not just in traditional media, but in social media as well. So think about X, think about Instagram, think about Snapchat, think about TikTok. All of these platforms have millions and billions of views every day. So we need to listen, we need to learn and act decisively when there is a flashpoint, not just in traditional media, but in social media. So those that we found that don't risk becoming the headline, case studies in what not to do next year, don't sit back and wait. Don't be that case study. Make sure you're acting and acting quickly and listening to what else is happening.
But I suppose, Dieter, the cover up can be worse than the crime sometimes. So to go back to my example of Prince Andrew at the start, sometimes an attempt to remedy a reputational issue can actually make it much, much worse. So there's got to be some, presumably, he had endless executives, PR people at his disposal to get that right. So clearly, responding sometimes is a bad thing. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of companies are concerned that if they do something, it might actually generate more interest.
Yeah. Look, the Prince Andrew one's really tough on so many levels. A really difficult situation for so many, and then part of a larger issue also in the United States connected with that. Super difficult. I think with the general corporations that we work with, businesses large and small, the words sort of cover up or hide something are words we just never use. The any thought or tendency to shy away from something that you know to be true, or try and cover it up or not talk about it as much as you should, we just simply don't recommend that whatsoever. And we'll often have difficult conversations with leadership around the pros and cons of getting out there. But when something is a genuine crisis, as we've mentioned before, bad injuries, loss of life, pure disruption to the services you provide the community, your customers, a P&L in free fall, all within a matter of hours. You got to get out there on the front foot and explain what's happening, even if it's super uncomfortable. And we've got a case study here around Optus. Now, Optus has had a few breakdowns of its service, but people might remember, a year and a half or so ago when the Optus services went down, it included 000. And we all know what a critical service 000 is for people. And not only did it go down, there were several calls to 000 that were genuine emergencies that were not able to get through, and people passed away as a result. At times like that, there is no reason, and it's really foolish to not talk for 3/4 of a day or even more and not get out there and explain what was going on. It's uncomfortable. That one's also a very difficult one, but you've really got to get out there minimize your delay, understand the depth of what's going on. And even if you don't know the root cause right then, say it. That's okay, because it's not a perfect situation. No one would have wanted that situation to happen. But you've got to get out there and explain what you know and what you're doing to remedy. Super important.
Well, I think that sort of leads into my next question, which is around, executive comfort with these scary topics. I mean, obviously, once a journalist contacts you or there's an article or something, most people feel out of their depth in terms of what should we do. So what do you recommend in terms of crisis training? What does that look like for executives? Um, why do so many people still freeze when the camera turns on?
Yeah, I'll kick this one off talking about media training and getting comfortable in front of a camera. So one of the other elements of my professional career, Paul, has been working in television, and I still do that. I've been working in TV for 20 years, and I call it a hobby. I commentate football or soccer, as it's known. And this weekend, I was working all weekend. That's probably explains the head cold, but working on camera in a live TV environment is not easy. I've been doing it for 20 years, and you still get the butterflies in the tummy when that camera rolls. So it's not something that comes naturally to many or most people. So focused media training can help with these scenarios and can help you get more comfortable. And we do a lot of media training in our organization with some of the leading institutions in Australia. And what we find is the best CEOs are the ones that practice this discipline more than once a year. So when we look at, I use the analogy of a sporting term. So, the Grand Prix was recently in Melbourne. Oscar Piastri is one of the leading drivers at the moment, albeit for his poor start to the season. But what I often say is that, Oscar doesn't get in a car once a year and win a Grand Prix. He's practicing every day. And the intricacies of driving that car are very detailed, just as they are when you're in front of a camera. So getting comfortable in front of the camera is one thing, then being able to deliver your messages in a pressure environment is another. So I would encourage leaders, CEOs, leadership teams to ensure that media training is something that you have in your calendar more than once a year. Do it quarterly. Do it with your internal media teams, but then bring in external people to test you as well. Because often when you do it with your internal teams, you're comfortable with those people, but it's uncomfortable when you bring external people into the program and get them to test you on real life scenarios. Some of the things that that are risks to your organization, make them as real as possible and get comfortable speaking in front of a camera. Then there's the crisis communications planning, and I know Dita's done a lot of work on this, and they're equally important, Dita.
Yeah, I mean, with your scenarios, as Michael says, you can test those scenarios in the boardroom. You can test them in the executive leadership environments. You can test them literally outside if you have operations that are generally outdoor or large manufacturing sites or what have you. But one thing I think you really got to have and refine in that process, Paul, and listeners and viewers, is that you got to have a plan. What is that crisis communications plan? Businesses are often really good at having operation plans. So operations go down. Those managers in those environments know what's gone wrong and know how to bring those operations back up, generally relatively quickly and relatively smoothly, unless there is a really large hazard that's got in the way. So operations tends to work well because they're used to it. But communications is a bit of a different field. You've got to have a communications plan, and we call it a playbook, a really step-by-step list of things and playbook that you've got to go through and tick off to make sure you're responding properly on the communication side? Are you telling your people quickly and accurately what's going on? Are you telling your customers quickly and accurately what's going on? Are you telling members of the general public who may be involved with nothing to do with themselves, just a location, for instance, what's going on and what they need to know? Are you telling regulators, legislators? It goes on. And you've got to have this stuff ready. This is not the stuff you can pull together on the day or in the moment. Because in the moment, if you don't have that plan ready, you're sort of half cooked before you start.
Yeah, it's such a good point, isn't it? And you often may get no notice of something that's come to the media's attention or a journalist's attention. But I think what we're sort of saying is that if you're a senior executive in a large company or you're on a board, certainly a publicly listed company or a large private company, there's probably an expectation now from shareholders or employees that there is someone in the organization that has the competency to respond to a media crisis, given the consequences of what we know can happen if something goes viral, something goes wrong, and it's not addressed, or it is addressed and it's addressed very, very poorly. Um, I mean, it can theoretically lead to the destruction of a company. So
And
um, these are really critical skills that we're talking about. I've had
that
media
they are,
training.
Paul.
It's not comfortable to do, but it's a good skill to have.
Sorry, Paul, to interrupt you there. Yes, it is. It is. And, we would say it shouldn't be just one person in the organization. You need bench strength because if it's one person, that could also be a single source of failure. What if they're away on leave? What if they're quite ill? What if they're international on a plane? What if they're simply unavailable within a decent amount of time to respond? There should be at least two or three senior members of organisations who are trained and ready to face the music when they have to. Again, as Michael said at the top, it's not easy. We don't sit here and suggest it's easy at all, but that's why you need the training. That's where you need the practice. That's where you need those skills in your tool belt to be able to manage the worst day, not just the best days when the P&L's happy and customers are, happy and products are flying off the shelves. It's how you manage the toughest days that often can define your leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And not that we're suggesting, CEOs be trained to talk like politicians and avoid answering every question. But I will say, understanding what a pivot is and how to do that effectively is a brilliant skill, whether you are using it in the boardroom or in front of the media. And that can save you from having to make a pretty devastating admission or simply say, I don't know, or I can't answer that. So you can pick up some actually really useful life skills from media training as well. So it's a good exercise to go through.
It is, and we often say it's not media training. That can be a term that's used. It's communications training. So as you say, you could be in a boardroom. You could be answering questions from the chair or various non-executive directors or chairs of various committees. And the way you answer is super important. You could be in the executive room leading a conversation, looking to get some capital for a project, and you want to make sure that you land your request clearly and enunciate things in a way that are compelling, that'll help you grab that X amount of dollars that's available in the capital grab that everyone wants a piece of for their own projects. You could be out doing public speaking, representing your company, and there could be an audience of 200, 300 people. I don't know. But you want to, again, have the skills to be really clear and articulate what you want to in a way that's compelling and enjoyable, and that you have a reason for being there. What's your absolute purpose for being there in the first place? And how do you get to that point through how you communicate with that audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for those watching, Dieter, you do have slides there. I think you might want to move them along to this one that relates to what happens if you're asked to give an on-camera interview. It would be a fairly extreme situation where that might happen, but what are your thoughts? Is that a no comment or is it a written statement only? And when should someone from a company appear on camera?
I'll kick this one off because I have an example where we worked when I was at Telstra. There were some very high profile outages of the mobile network, and we obviously all rely on our mobile phones a lot these days. So when the mobile network goes down with Australia's largest carrier, it's a big issue. And so the CEO at the time, Andy Penn, I worked closely with him. He had a big media team and a communications team who were able to respond quickly. But when there is an emerging issue like that that's moving very quickly, it is important to front up. So that's a genuine crisis. You need to front up because people cannot make a phone call. They need to know what you're doing to fix it, how you're going to fix it, and when you're going to fix it. Now, you might not have all the answers, but by fronting up and doing live TV, doing live radio, it is very important to show leadership, to show that you're on it, to show that you're fixing it, to show that you're concerned, to apologize to the customers who are not going to be able to use their mobile device at that time. This happened several times in the course of several weeks, but Andy did a great job of fronting up in a crisis and communicating well. And that was very different to the way Optus managed their crises a few years later. And ultimately, the CEO of Optus lost her job, partly because of the way that they managed their issue.
It's such a good point. I'd like to almost reinforce that, Paul, to all your listeners, because if there is a genuine crisis in your organization, saying that you're stuck in a meeting or you're not able to get to it, or can we do it tomorrow? That doesn't cut it. So we really encourage senior leaders, including our legal colleagues. I know personally I've been very lucky over 30 years to work with some outstanding senior legal counsels, and chief legal officers in difficult times, and they've been brilliant in prioritizing it. If you have a genuine crisis in your business, that is your priority. And from the legal side, we really lean on them for advice and guidance to make sure that we're not saying the wrong things in our attempts to make sure we're as open as we can and transparent as we can. But for leaders, we really say that not fronting up, as Andy Penn did so well when he fronted up for those issues of outages, that's A-class gold standard. Not fronting up is not good enough if it's a genuine crisis.
So you've got on the slide for people who are listening a screenshot from Four Corners where the Woolworths CEO Brad Banducci, I think it is, was allegedly embarrassing interview on camera. What is it that you would say that he did wrong?
Having worked at Coles for a while, large rival of Woolies, and having watched Brad Banducci for some time, he's a really decent guy. I think that's the first thing that needs to be said. He always has appeared, in my opinion, to be a very humble man. A mistake that he made during this Four Corners interview, almost a couple of years now, just over a couple of years now, around pricing and supplier issues. He was asked some questions and he talked about the retirement of a former ACCC leader. And he then thought, whoops, I've said the wrong thing. Can I take that out? He asked the reporter, can you take that out? And the reporter said, no, it's sort of a live to camera interview. So you said it, we'll leave it in there. And Brad then sort of got stuck in his mind and thought, well, no, I'm out. I don't want to continue this discussion. I do this with good intent, is what he says during the exchange. And he absolutely, in my opinion, absolutely does it with the right intent. But This example is here in crisis situations to remind people that the getting up and walking off, or a covering of a face, or things like that, again, just aren't the right way to go, because it can be seized upon really quickly as an admission of wrongdoing, or that it got too much for them, when in reality, he did say something that he wanted to take back. And our advice, and it's easy to advise, post incidents, always easy. But really, even if you do say something on camera that you wish you hadn't, you can address that in the moment and say, sorry, I got that wrong. That didn't come out right. What I meant was, because Paul, let's face it, we all make mistakes when we talk. Not all of us are sitting in a sort of interview situation with four corners under some pretty high pressure and questioning. It's not simple, but if we do say something, it's okay to admit that, correct it, and move on.
Yeah, got it. Okay, well, what about employees? What their stakeholders as well. What should be communicated to them during a crisis to prevent leaks and panic and internal backlash?
Yeah, where possible, they should be told first. So it may not be possible if the company is publicly listed and a statement needs to be made to the exchange. But even then, employees should be communicated to at the same time as the stock exchange announcement goes out. So they should be briefed personally where possible. They should know first wherever possible. So they can be your best advocates. They could be your worst nightmare, according to how you roll out your communications, messaging, and timings. And we see it all the time where employees do leak if they are disgruntled. So ensuring a culture where they are put first is really important.
And I guess they're the source of most of the information. So if they feel not consulted with or aggrieved by whatever the particular issue is, and there's no engagement from their employer with them, it's probably not surprising that they will actively reach out to the journalist, or if contacted, might cooperate. Now, most of our clients will have social media policies and things like that that prohibit that, and that's a very, very serious, breach of duty of good faith to provide sensitive, confidential, commercial information to external sources, outside certain structures under the whistleblower legislation. But I think you're right. I mean, that's often missed, and sometimes that can mean that the story takes on a lot more detail because employees start providing information. And journalists do have some pretty insidious ways of getting this by contacting people on Facebook and also, Instagram chats and all sorts of things, which doesn't seem entirely professional, but I guess takes cooperation, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It really does. Yep. And the speed, as Michael said, again, it's critical. The longer you leave a void anywhere in communication, it will be filled by others.
Mm.
And generally, if it's filled by others, it might not be the sort of commentary that you'd prefer. So that speed and accuracy again, and employees deserve to know. 99.9% of employees, I believe, come to work and do the right thing. There aren't that many rogues out there that really want to come in and do a bad day's work and spread misinformation. I truly believe that most people are there to do the right thing. So it's really important to make sure that they are brought up to date right away, straight away, even if there are still gaps in the knowledge. Bring them in straight away.
What about this? I think a lot of oxygen that people get from these stories is where perhaps there's an ongoing narrative and no sort of conclusion, and it's sort of the, what's going to happen next kind of scenario that allows subsequent articles and developments to continue to really do what the media wants to do, which is elongate the story for as long as possible. Is there a point where a company should actually try and cut the oxygen and say, publicly apologize or accept some responsibility if that is, legally and commercially the thing to do? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a case by case situation. It's difficult to give a broad comment. But what I will say is that media these days are really governed or driven by the amount of interaction or clicks that they get when articles are posted. So, and some media organizations are now remunerating journalists based on the number of clicks they get on a story. So if you publish a story on a particular company and it rates highly, a bit like your TV ratings, your editors will push you to keep finding more story dirt, if you like, on that organization. So they will be driven by those metrics, and that's now a global phenomenon where we're seeing these metrics introduced. So it might be the case that you want to try and shut down the story. That might be out of your hands. So even if you cut the oxygen off, if the story is generating interest and it's not being driven by the organization itself, it's been driven by others, then it is difficult to stop that narrative sometimes. So yeah, it can be difficult.
And there still comes a point, Paul, where if you've said all that there is to say, and the angles are getting a little more few and far between, or a little more longer bowed, it's absolutely acceptable for you to say, appreciate your questions. We've spoken about all we have on this topic. Everything that we know on the topic has been aired and spoken about. So appreciate your comments, but that's where we're stopping it. Unless there's significant new things that come to pass, it's still within a company's gift to be able to do that. But you've got to make sure it's at the right time. And I'd like to also underscore what you said before, Paul, particularly for listeners and viewers of this podcast, is that in times of crisis, whether it's internal communications people or external folks like us coming into an organisation to assist, we really take the lead from legal about publicly accepting responsibility before all the facts are known, or anything that has legal and commercial implications. We really do look for that guidance. So we will potentially recommend a series of answers that we think best describes the situation, which is always done with sincerity and humility and the right values. But Paul, you and your peers and colleagues might say, look, we're not able to say this because this could land us in jeopardy down the track for reasons X, Y, Z. And we, on those occasions, absolutely defer to our legal colleagues in the room or on the phone or however the crisis meeting is held to help guide us through what can and can't be said, given all the circumstances at play.
Yeah, it's a good point. And we certainly work with PR companies under legal privilege arrangements, so there can be free discussion and disclosure of documents between the client, the law firm, the PR company, without fear of that being disclosable in some context. Are you able to say, just anecdotally, what are the top issues that the media is interested in? Is it, sexual related behavior in workplaces? And I guess talking specifically of workplaces, is it child safety related matters? Is it sort of governance failures, theft, fraud? I mean, to me, all of those sorts of things are people like to know about, like to read about.
Yeah, they are. You've probably hit them pretty much all on the head. Probably some of another one, Paul, I would look at is cybercrime
Yeah.
in the workplace, because depending on what sector you're in, say if you are, for instance, in the health sector, and we've seen a few of these in Australia and around the world, where cyber criminals have been able to obtain massive amounts of data on people's very sensitive health and wellbeing records, personal records around health. That's a really big one right now for us, even as a small company. Cybercrime is now the third largest economy in the world, behind the US and China, in terms of total value.
Yeah, wow.
That's sort of pretty scary. It's that prominent and it's that widespread. And it's not just big businesses and big corporations around the world. We've worked with single party operators who have had their customers' data thieved from their small laptops in their own either consulting rooms or wherever they work, factories, because cyber criminals are very good at finding their way into private data storage and then removing that, and sometimes ransoming organizations for that. And you get into a whole different type of scenario. But they're the sort of things in the workplace, in addition to the ones you've suggested, that I think are most prominent today.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so what are some of the warning signs that an employer might want to look more closely at that might suggest that there's a public crisis brewing? What are the sorts of things they shouldn't ignore?
Do you want to start with that, Michael? Do you want me to have a crack at that?
Yeah, I'll let you kick off that one if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Let me just clear. I think the warning signs are, let's start around commercial success or not. So some of the warning signs can appear inside an organization when there are very high targets, highly pressurized corporate metrics to hit. And that can lead to organizations not always making the right decisions around what they do. And I've got a couple of examples that I just want to flick to, if I may. And this one's still happening as we speak. I think many of your readers and viewers, certainly in the Australian market, would be familiar with the Coles Group. Coles is a very large leading supermarket chain throughout Australia, and they are currently the subject of a federal court matter around their pricing guarantees and pricing offers. Again, if you're familiar with Coles, you're probably familiar with the big red finger of down, prices are down. But what we're hearing out of the federal court is evidence around those prices that were seemingly way down were actually cheaper than the down prices not 3 or 4 weeks prior. And when you look at some of the evidence that the court has heard, it's around needing to keep up with competitors such as Woolworths, who we mentioned earlier, on a day-to-day pricing and P&L scenario. And to advertise prices as down, my understanding, it needs to be a minimum of at least 12 weeks in the marketplace, around 3 months, to have your prices lowered for organisations like Coles to say this is a genuine lower price that we've had for some time. But on occasion, some of that period was now 3 to 4 weeks where they were claiming the prices were down, but they were actually cheaper prior. So that really, to me, talks about chasing financial metrics and trying to hit targets and the pressure that people are under to the decisions that they make. Probably another one worth considering is employees remaining more sort of quiet than normal. They might sort of appear withdrawn, more withdrawn than they used to be. Employees might have sort of issues around silence when you're having team meetings and asking questions on various topics. Sort of the mood of the meeting, if you like, from your employee base. That can sometimes suggest that something's not right, or there are a series of things that aren't right. People avoiding sort of social interactions. It can often be a warning flag, Paul, that there's something quite not right under the surface. And an extension of that might be sort of increased absenteeism or gossip in the workforce.
Yeah.
I think anytime folks are away for extended periods of time without sort of clear reasons provided to their manager, as you normally would if you need to be away for whatever reason or a set of reasons for an amount of time, normally you would work with your manager and explain what was going on, and then you could work out between the two of you and others if required what could be done to support you. But when folks are continually away and there's gossip around the office, whatever those topics might be, these are really signs that all might not be right, and there might be something larger than you think around the corner, ready to rear its head.
Yeah, and I think obviously those workplaces where there's a lot of grievances, where exit interviews demonstrate very poor experiences in the workplace, where there's a lot of whistleblower complaints or workplace investigations or, higher senior terminations and things like that. Broadly, toxic workplace, for want of better description. I think that's where we see a bit of risk. The goings on in workplaces continues to be a source of interest to many journalists. So I would say that's probably a bit of a warning sign to look for as well.
And as leaders, you want to know, Paul. I'd want to know what was going on. I'd want to know in leadership. And whistleblowing processes can help uncover this, but I'd much rather know what was going on than not.
Yeah, you've got to do pulse checks and surveys and things like that, and not to sound sort of old-fashioned about this, but the increased trend with people working from home for, numerous days a week or depending on the type of organization, every day of the week can really disenfranchise people from the values of the organization and certainly cut off oversight in terms of how people are thinking and feeling about issues in the workplace. And that's a challenge. So I think that can feed into some of these sorts of issues. If you don't know what your employees are saying, thinking, doing, you're not going to know if they're leaking things to journalists or increasingly dissatisfied. Now, one of the final topics is also one of the probably most obvious ones that we see in this PR space as it relates to workplaces, which is social media comments around political or social issues. And that's where we've seen quite a bit of media in Australia where those issues have become viral. There might be a social media policy that prohibits putting your name out there and looking like you're representing the organization when you're making comments. Do you have any advice about how employers should deal with this increased social media phenomenon? Because let's face it, there's so many important issues in the world at the moment. It's very difficult to have no opinion on them. People are expressing them on Twitter, X, and Instagram and Facebook. They may be connected to a whole bunch of people. Their account may not be private, or it may be obvious from their account where they work. I think
I think it's really important to have very clear social media policies to start with, Paul, and educate your employees about what is right and what is wrong. So it's okay to have a policy. You may have started at that organization 5 years ago. The way that social media has evolved over the last 5 years means that those policies that were implemented 5 years ago may not be as relevant today as they were when they were first implemented. So continue to update those policies, continue to educate employees about what is acceptable and what is not, and be clear on what a personal view is versus a company view, and ensure that there is dialogue when clarity is not being achieved. It's also important to realize that people use social media away from work on the weekends. So you being captured doing something that your organization would not be proud of on the weekend could also land you into trouble. So being very clear, it's not just political opinion or opinion on social issues, but it's also what you might be doing on the weekend. And if that doesn't fit within the values of your organization and is captured and goes viral, then that could be problematic as well. There was one high profile case which viewers of this podcast may remember, especially if you're in Australia, and that was an ABC journalist. Her name was Antoinette Lattouf. And she was taken off air by the ABC, the national broadcaster in Australia, after reposting a video which was from Human Rights Watch. And that video was about Gaza. She was taken off air and suspended. She took that matter to court, and the federal court ruled that it was unlawful dismissal under Section 772 of the Fair Work Act, because it was political opinion, including expression on social media, which is protected. So it is very important to understand as employers what you can and can't do when it comes to social media.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think in that case, she wasn't directed not to make those comments. So, if you're going to have a strict rule that you can't make any comments on social media about political issues, then that has to be pretty clear, probably at the point of recruitment and in an employment contract, so people can understand when they're accepting the job that, there are some limitations around freedom of expression on those sorts of sites. So also some really interesting observations from Josh Bornstein, who I interviewed on this podcast last year on this very topic, which suggests that companies suffer very little long-term damage from the brand reputation and implications of these sorts of scenarios. Short-term, different story. But he says, and I'm sure there's some case studies out there that contradicts this, but he says that the number of companies that have gone under because of comments somebody made on social media are virtually non-existent. So it does beg the question around, how do you respond when something like this comes up? Is it so serious that a high-profile person has to be immediately removed from the organization? Or is there a better PR response than simply firing somebody?
Yeah, it's such a fine line, isn't it? And particularly in this case, the national broadcaster, who are meant to be apolitical, if you like. That's really a central and core part of a role in any newsroom, for that matter. I wonder sometimes whether the ABC gets held almost to a higher degree of scrutiny as the national broadcaster, and maybe that's fair enough too. But it's such a fine line. In answer to your question about at what point, how bad is too bad in the short term for a situation to be through social media or any other outlet, I think that's where you've got to really let the data help guide you. We all will have personal opinions, say in this case, of whether or not it was an appropriate thing to do in the Lattouf versus ABC matter to have her removed because of her views. But really, if you want to make the best decisions, like anywhere else in business, it's really worthwhile looking at the facts and the data, and not just opinions and emotions drive your decisions. And as an example, we have several ways in which we measure in real time the sort of reach and sentiment of any issue on any given day. And that can help us guide, that can help us and organizations sort of make hopefully better decisions rather than instant negative reaction and emotion. Let's have a look at really what the data says. What's the real sentiment of this matter across the community? And let us maybe be guided by that more than what our own opinions might or emotions might be driving in that difficult moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I have seen that data that you produce showing, this was picked up by one news agency only. And I think when you're at the center of a media story, you think everyone's reading about it. And it's been interesting for me too, as a lawyer working on these sorts of matters over the years. You mention a name and you think people will say, "Oh, you worked on that. I remember that." Most people were like, "Oh, I didn't hear about that. I didn't see that. I didn't read about that. What's that about?" Um, so that's an interesting point, not to get too carried away thinking the whole world. Now maybe if you're an astronomer, perhaps, I think the whole world was reading about the
Yep,
Coldplay concert,
they were.
Was.
Yeah.
but it's not always going to be the case. So, just finally, as well as letting our listeners and viewers know how they can get in touch with you if they need some assistance in this area, probably like me, your greatest successes are things that people have never heard about because you've managed to keep them out of the public domain. Can you give us any insights into any anonymous war stories where perhaps you've managed to stop a story from breaking?
It's always
Yes.
it's a
Oh,
difficult one. I'll let you start, Dita. Yeah.
yeah. It is a difficult one, and look, in terms of things that we may have tried to keep out, we certainly don't even attempt to sort of keep out as such, because issues are issues and they should be judged on their merits and their seriousness in many ways. And I think it might have said earlier, 9 times out of 10, we would advise people in leadership in organisations to really lean in to significant matters that the organisation or they as individuals are facing. But there are times where there are matters that are threatened to go public that are so sort of far from the truth, you do actually batten down the hatches and say, you know what, we're actually not going to cop that. That's just not true and it's out of control. And I remember one really distinctly, and this comes from the aged care sector. And having had a parent who spent his final couple of years in aged care, it is an incredibly sensitive area, and not just in Australia, but around the world, in particular to the quality of care that residents receive. It's not always easy to care for people in their 80s, 90s, and even older. But at the same time, they absolutely deserve the dignity and care at that time, probably more than at any other time in their lives. It is a really sensitive topic. But we did have one in a former work life where family members of an elderly man, their father, in aged care, were alleging gross mistreatment of their father in the aged care environment. Incorrect medications, non-showers, sort of a litany of poor care that they put to us at the time, and it just seemed really odd. Not to say at the time we got everything perfectly right. Not true. There are occasions where things happen that you wish wouldn't. If the wrong medication is delivered once to somebody, that can have real effect, and it's a really important matter to stay on top of. But this sort of list of claims look way out of it. Anyway, we went straight to the clinical nurse teams that worked with this man in aged care and accessed his medical records, literally written and electronic medical records that just did not show anything like what had been alleged. So at the time, they did say that if you didn't pay us $500,000, we're going to put this into the public arena through media.
Mm,
And we felt that was straight out extortion based on the facts that
yeah.
we had. We brought them into the home, showed them the medical records personally, as their father gave permission to show those records. And it was absolutely false. And fair to say that $500,000 demand disappeared within about 30 seconds after they left the front door. So there are times, Paul, where you just say, no, this is not right, or we don't think that's right. And if that's the case, stand your ground every time.
Yeah. Michael, any stories from you practicing the dark arts of PR that have caused a story
Well,
to disappear?
Yeah, look, I suppose not the dark arts, but I suppose it's just about being honest at times and highlighting that the culture of an organization is the right one. You're not trying to hide something. So we do a lot of work in the sports sector as well, with high profile teams at a national level. And there was one in particular issue where the advice we gave wasn't going to be the easiest path to help manage that particular issue, but we provided the advice, which meant that the head coach of that team was required to make a statement at a media conference to explain an issue which probably would not have emerged unless he spoke about it. But morally and culturally, it was the right thing for him to do. And whilst he initially resisted the advice, he took it on board and front footed the issue. And ultimately, what that meant was that it highlighted that this organization was not prepared to sweep something under the carpet. It was prepared to face the issue front on. It was prepared to talk about the culture of the organization. It was prepared to highlight that the behavior demonstrated by certain players was not on, and that the organization was going to do something about it. So rather than sweeping it under the carpet, we faced it front on, and it highlighted that the culture of the organization and that team in particular was a good one, and that any misdemeanors were going to be managed and not hidden. And ultimately, it meant that the story did come out, but it could have been a lot worse if the organization didn't front foot that issue. And inevitably, it would have come out somewhere down the track. So the option that we put forward was the better option in terms of how to manage that issue.
Interesting. I must say, I've had one or two journalists drop a story after, we've told them there's mental health issues with the person concerned that they're wanting to write a story on. I mean, they are human journalists after all. Sometimes they have some empathy for the subject. If someone's well-being is going to be seriously jeopardized by the story they want to write, they will sometimes drop the story. I think it depends maybe who the journalist is or how interesting the story is, but that's worked a couple of times. I think I keep mentioning it all the time, so I think they're starting to wonder if that's just the tagline. But interesting tips and tricks there. So, how can our listeners contact you if they'd like more information about Nominus?
Yeah, look, our information is on our website. So our phone number's there, our emails are there. So nominus.me is our website. Just search it up and you'll be able to find us there. Happy to take any calls and email as well. But one of the key things is don't wait for a crisis to happen. I think that's my closing remark would be prepare for it to happen. So be ready. Don't wait until the journalist calls to get ready. Get ready before any issue emerges, and that could be by ensuring that your crisis communications plan is up to date. It could be ensure that you've got one to start with, or it could mean ensure that you do your training as a media, whether it's communications training or media training. Do all those things to make sure you're prepared for the inevitable, because it will happen in some shape or form at some point.
Yeah, and don't wait for the article to be published before you contact a PR company. Like,
yeah, correct.
For us, don't wait for the first day of a court hearing to contact your lawyers.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Be prepared, as Michael says. Absolutely, practice. Boards really now are requiring their executive teams and CEO to show evidence around mitigation. So, is this organization well governed for a genuine crisis? There's the operational side of things, but then there's also the communications side of things.
Missed an episode? You can catch previous episodes on our website and as a podcast on Apple and Spotify.